For the people who were here on time, what I think we'll do is we may start as a subcommittee, so we can economize the time of all of you great state workers who are here. So I'm not going to have a long opening. I have one. It was actually going to be a 25-minute opening statement where I was going to discuss the fact that Senator Negrete McLeod and I are going to discuss the governor's reorganization, the GRP1, and it proposes to streamline overlapping functions between the Department of Personnel Administration and the State Personnel Board into a single department that we're going to call the Department of Human Resources, CalHR. I'm not going to go into any more details on what I had. The senator who chairs my sister committee is going to have an opening, and we'll move from there. And if I could, I don't see him, but I saw, there he is, Mr. Morgenstern, Ms. Lee, and Mr. Gillihan, if you guys would come forward and take the chairs right here. I'm going to shift over to my colleague from my sister committee, Senator Negrete McLeod.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Senator Wright.
You have to push that button. That one.
It's on.
There you go.
Okay.
It gets brighter.
Good morning, and thank you, Senator Wright. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today and want to thank everyone for being here. The consolidation of the Department of Personnel Administration and the State Personnel Board has been considered on numerous occasions and by several administrations in the past, but without ever achieving an integrated state human resource department. You know what? I want to take Mr. Wright's lead and not speak long on this so we can go ahead and start on this.
Okay, we've got witnesses in front. We now have 4 of us present. This will constitute a subcommittee. Mr. Morgenstern, if Mr. Gillihan, Ms. Lee, if we interrupt you, it's only because we want to establish a quorum. So I assure you it wasn't anything that you said, unless something is like really bad and we interrupt. But notwithstanding that, we may interrupt just to establish a quorum. Thank you all for being here this morning. Mr. Morgenstern, you're first on.
Do I have to? Yeah, I guess.
Do people ever like tell you that like the woman who played Rhoda, her name was Morgenstern, and then tease you that you guys have the same name?
I was Morgenstern before Rhoda.
Okay.
But I never made TV.
Well, you know what? You're on now. You made it. This is your big shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us by. I'm going to be not quite as brief as you, but pretty brief. We have experts here to do the real testimony. But as has been pointed out, this has been suggested on several occasions. The fact that it is not the most efficient way to proceed to have 2 separate personnel departments for the great state of California as an idea that surfaced many times before.
Mr. Morgenstern?
Time out.
Okay. We have a quorum from our committee, so please call the roll.
Negrete McLeod.
Here.
Negrete McLeod here. Walters. Here. Walters here. Gaines. Here. Gaines here. Padilla. Vargas. Here. Vargas here.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I may proceed. Okay. As this is an idea that didn't just arise this year. I have to say, in all frankness, it's an idea that occurred to us when we first created the Department of Personnel Administration back in the first Brown administration in the 70s. It's not only did it occur to us then, but it's been recommended on 4 separate occasions by the Hoover Commission in 1995, 1999, 2005, and again in 2011. The legislative analysts called for this merger in 1995, and CPR under the previous governor called for it in 2005. It seems clear to people that it would be a savings and an efficiency if we could combine the many various personnel functions of the state of California. I think the difference this time is that we have leadership in the State Personnel Board and in the department that both recognize that this efficiency and improvement in state government that come about, and so they're less, perhaps in the past we had some people that were a little more territorial, which does tend to happen in organizations. Besides that, we have a governor at this point who recognizes the importance of us operating government with the least possible expense to the citizens, and we have this economic crisis, financial crisis, which leads all of us to, I think, be more understanding of the situation. So, several of us, I think we had 4 people who had been directors at DPA and a director over at SPB and a chairperson who all agreed that we could accomplish significant savings. There's probably no personnel action in the state of California that doesn't involve both the State Personnel Board and the Department of Personnel Administration at one point or another. Consolidating those agencies should create some savings internally within the new Cal HR. I think much more importantly in terms of savings is that the various departments and appointing agencies in the state of California, and there are a great number, numbering over 100, will all find life easier, less complicated, and hopefully less expensive when they don't have to guess which department to go to or go back and forth between the State Personnel Board and the Department of Personnel Administration, which is a complaint I received repeatedly throughout my 2 terms as director at DPA, and I'm sure the State Personnel Board has endured the same thing. The only real area of conflict that we received over the many months that we've been planning this has been some concern from labor organizations about the discipline issue. We have outlined currently in CDCR and can outline throughout state government if we choose a DPA, a scheme or a matrix to try and bring some consistency to discipline. And in this report, we ask that that matrix be given due consideration by the State Personnel Board. The only reason for this matrix, in our mind, the only reason for it is to try to get some consistency and discipline across the various departments so that we don't see in one department a suspension, in another department an oral reprimand, and another department a firing, all for the same offense. That may come about in any case because of different circumstances of the person involved, but we try to have some consistency, or at least an outline of what a consistent set would be if all the circumstances were the same. The State Personnel Board, we cannot do anything, nor do we seek to do anything to change the constitutional authority of the State Personnel Board in discipline and all other subjects where they have constitutional authority. Nothing we do or intend to do or want to do is intended to impact in any way on the State Personnel Board's constitutional authority, and I just want to make that clear for the record. With that, I'd really like to turn this over to the more expert people that are sitting on either side of me. Julie?
Thanks. I've never been here before, so thank you for inviting me. I just wanted to provide maybe a little bit of detailed information. I think that everybody probably understands the overview that we have this bifurcated system right now, and that departments have to go both to SPB and DPA for their day-to-day personnel transaction needs. And so what we're trying to do by creating CalHR is come up with a one-stop shop where departments can go and get all those day-to-day personnel needs met. And by doing this, we feel that we'll create efficiencies not just by combining DPA and SPB, but for the line departments down the road. Right now, for example, they have to create 2 different packets when they want to create a new CEA position. And both of those packets have to work their way through both departments. The departments are forced to ping-pong back and forth between each other. and it really slows down the process. It's not very efficient at all. So a few of the details, there's 221 employees at the Department of Personnel Administration, and all of them will transfer to the new CalHR. CalHR will be an excluded department, so all those employees will not be represented. The State Personnel Board has staff over there that do those day-to-day personnel operations that I mentioned, and those people will be moving over to CalHR. So we feel like there'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 people going over there. What will stay at the board are everything related to merit, everything that they do right now under the Constitution, the appeals unit, all of the classification approvals, and they're going to create a new unit that will be their audit unit, and we're working with the Department of Finance and their Office of State Audits and Evaluations, and that group is going to help the board determine how many people they need to audit the different merit functions. So that's kind of an overview of what it looks like, the big picture.
Richard Gillahan, Department of Finance. So Secretary Morgenstern and Ms. Lee kind of presented an overview of the consolidation effort. We would just note that the plan estimates savings of about $5.8 million due to PY reductions occurring over 2012-13 and 13-14. A small portion of that is actually scored in the current year budget related to the elimination of the HR mod project, and then the remaining savings would be phased in 12-13 and 13-14. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any on the fiscal side.
Any questions from the committee? All right, let me, you referenced the 200 employees who would transfer, who would not be represented. Are they currently represented?
No, those employees at DPA are not.
Okay, so there'd be no change in terms of their status and representation in the reorg?
Not for the 221 of DPA employees. For the employees that would be coming from the board, they would now be excluded. So there would be about 100 employees. Some of those are managers and they're already not represented. I can get you an exact rank and file number.
I'm just trying to, let me try this again, and I mean, English gives me such a difficult time. I'm trying to understand how many employees would actually lose the ability to be represented that currently have it. So if the 121 would not, then we won't worry about those, but you mentioned the other group of employees. How many of them are currently represented who, as a result of the plan, would lose representation? I mean, you may not know it exactly, but approximately.
Less than 100 coming from SPB.
That's the 100 period.
Okay. And why would we not be able to have them represented?
DPA's currently all of its employees are excluded, being the part of the department that negotiates with unions and represents management and all of its labor management affairs. The departments like that are traditionally not part of the union program.
Okay, I thought I understood, and then you lost me again. So this 100 employees, if they're part of DPA, shouldn't be represented anyway because they would have already been excluded.
Everybody who was at DPA was never represented.
Right.
So the state personnel board non-managerial people were, and now they won't, and that's some number under 100.
Okay. Are there other questions of this group? Senator Gaines?
Yeah, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more in terms of, it's my interpretation in terms of what I'm listening about here is the governor's trying to consolidate government agencies to get the state of California operating in a more efficient manner. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, and with that comes consolidation of staff from 2 agencies within the state of California as it relates to personnel.
Correct.
And I think Senator Wright was, I'm looking for clarification too. What happens in terms of job status? What is the impact as a result of the consolidation of these two agencies in terms of employment? Is the goal to reduce the number of state employees and thereby reducing the cost of government?
Yes, we will initially save about $5 million, as pointed out by Finance, as we consolidate. But that, I think, is a smaller savings than the one that gradually will come. Right now, every department in state government has its human resources people, its personnel people. Those people often get shunted back and forth between the two departments because it's not clear which one do they have to go to for a particular function. In fact, most functions of state personnel functions of state government involve both these departments. We think three of us sat down together who all were DPA directors along with the SPB director, Susie Ambrose, and figured there would be a significant reduction. Finance won't let us score it appropriately because we can't be precise into the number. But we think over the years there will be 10 to 15% reduction in the personnel staffs of the various departments of state government, providing more efficiency, lower cost, and just better service to the workers and the citizens of California.
Okay, and would that happen through natural attrition, or would
Yes.
there be layoffs?
No, we don't expect to have to do any layoffs. We think the attrition will more than take care of it.
Okay, and is this an effort, do you think, in every department in the state of California that the governor is going to be looking for future other consolidations?
I don't know that we're looking at, we're looking for more efficiency in every department of state government.
Okay.
And yes, I think the governor is looking at a number of consolidations and reductions in size and more efficiency.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I think what I'm hearing, though, is the efficiency is the number one thing that the governor is looking for, rather because you say they go from one department to another and they're constantly bouncing.
Yes, I think we'll be more efficient and more effective.
Which is the number one thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Let me raise another. The State Personnel Board is a constitutionally chartered body, so their functions are in the Constitution. In this plan, how do we ensure that those constitutional functions are maintained pursuant to the Constitution and that we don't blur the line between what the State Personnel Board has?
Well, primarily, of course, we have the integrity of the five, and we've gotten great cooperation, I hope I should add, from the members of the State Personnel Board in this whole process. It could not take place without it. They are appointed by the governor. They have 10-year terms of office, and like any other constitutional authority, it rests in them and their integrity. And the whole program was designed to see to it that we did not change to do anything to impinge on the constitutional authority of the board.
So, again, the reorg plan, as it's presented here, would merge the functions of these two agencies that do personnel work.
Yes.
Into a Department of Human Resources.
The Department of Human Resources, they both do personnel,
right,
human resources activity. We're going to house them together for more efficiency. We're going to merge those functions that are not constitutional, that should go together. The constitutional functions will remain under the authority of the State Personnel Board, its chair and its members.
Okay, so the leadership of the department, for example, I mean, you currently have two distinct departments that have two managers of sort. If you have one department, you'll have one manager. Where does the manager come from?
The governor appoints the manager of the new department.
So the governor will appoint the manager of the new department, and that manager would then, in theory, oversee the State Personnel Board?
Well, it won't oversee the board. It will oversee the staff functions that the board doesn't oversee. The board is authority only to the Constitution. You know, they have term officers. They're appointed by the governor, like any other term appointees, and the constitutional functions will still remain under them. You want to outline which those are, or beside discipline?
Yeah, right now the board deals with selection, civil rights, exams, psychological testing, appeals. So what the board is going to continue to do, all of the day-to-day personnel functions will come to CalHR so that the board can really focus on its merit aspects, and we'll be adding the audit function to them so that they can go out and audit departments to make sure that exams, for example, are upholding the merit principle. So they'll keep their appeals function and they'll add an audit function, and they remain an independent board. So right now the board is under state and
right now it's under State Consumer Affairs. Then now it'll be part of CalHR for administrative purposes. But we have several examples in the state government where there are independent boards that the director of the department has no authority on. In workers' compensation and unemployment appeals, in OSHA, we have governors-appointed boards that have authority to make their decisions, to maintain the integrity of their programs. There's a department director to oversee administration, but has no authority over them. Those are lesser agencies. They're not constitutional agencies like the State Personnel Board.
No, with and I'm just trying to just drill down this a little bit. The staff functions of the State Personnel Board, would the Personnel Board oversee their own staff, or would the staff be under the direction of the HR department?
Well, the director has administrative authority over them, but the State Personnel Board still maintains its ultimate authority over the functions that have to be done by the board.
The concern I have, and I don't, and it may not be a problem, but if I am a member of the State Personnel Board and all of my staff report to another person who isn't me, I mean, typically, for example, there'd be an executive director or an executive officer of a personnel board. Like, I mean, the one I'm more familiar with would be the Public Utilities Commission. And at the PUC, there's an executive director who is in charge of staff functions, but that executive director reports to the commissioners. So,
well, we'll have essentially the same function here for people directly under the State Personnel Board. And as we have, and that PUC function is just like the others I raised.
The State Personnel Board will still have an executive officer, its general counsel, all the appeals unit. There's about 40 or 50 people in the appeals unit. Mm-hmm. Those are all staff that will stay under the board, plus they'll get additional staff that will comprise the audit unit. So all of that staff will be under the board.
When you say under, they would be reporting to the board.
Correct.
So they're
employees of the board.
Okay, all right, that clears it, because as I understood your earlier description, they would report to the chief officer of HR, who could or could not be necessarily a part of the board. So the board's functions would still be the board functions, and those functions would remain with the board, and the board would be a part of the HR department.
As they are now part of an agency for administrative purposes. Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood that. So they would have staff and operations as a part of an agency, but there would still be some level of independence that they would maintain.
I think that's well described, some level of independence. They're still going to be able to have the people they want and need to do their job.
Okay. Any further questions of this panel? Let me say again, this is a joint hearing of the Senate GO Committee and the Senate Public Employees and Retirement Committee. We're in 4203. If you're on one of those committees, we'd like you to come. We have a couple of actions that we need to take. We do have a quorum in public employees. We don't have public employment, pardon me, but we don't yet have a quorum for GO. So if you're on the GO committee, and you're listening to this, please report to 4203. As I mentioned earlier, we have the people here who handle personnel issues, and they may take an administrative action if you are unable to show up. So without calling names, you know who you are. And if you're on the GO committee, if you'd please come forward. Are there any questions of this panel before we shift to the next panel? Okay, I'll defer to you. I'm not trying to call the show.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We'll go to the next panel, if they can come up. Susan Ambrose and Howard Schwartz.
Let me ask the first guys if you would stay with us for a while, because we may have a question that we need your assistance in before you get away.
Yeah, we'll just sit down.
Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Susie Ambrose, Executive Officer with the State Personnel Board. And I just wanted to acknowledge our board members who are present here, President May-Lee Tom, members Richard Costigan, and member Will Fox. And they're here to show their support for this proposal to consolidate and streamline the state's HR process. This proposal is really the result of a partnership between or among DPA, SPB, and labor agency. And what really happened was our board president, May-Lee Tom, and Secretary Morgenstern have a long history working together, and they collaborated on this proposal. There was an assurance early on that the board's constitutional authority would not be adversely impacted by this consolidation. The purpose of the consolidation is to consolidate HR processes and business processes in state HR, and not to...
Ms. Amber, let me, not to be rude, want to establish a quorum for the GO committee. Secretary, call the roll.
Wright.
Here.
Wright present. Anderson.
Here.
Anderson present. Berryhill.
Here.
Berryhill present. Calderon. Canella.
Here.
Canella present. Corbett.
Here.
Corbett present. De Leon. Evans.
Here.
Evans present. Hernandez.
Here.
Hernandez present. Padilla.
Here.
Padilla present. Strickland.
Here.
Strickland present. Wyland. Yee.
Okay. We notice we have a quorum on both committees now. Thank you. Please continue.
The board's independence and constitutional authority is preserved through this proposal by leaving intact the entire appeals function, by providing an audit function to the board so that the board can administer the merit system, and leaving, of course, the legal department that advises the board on all matters, as well as a policy function. So the board will still retain its authority to set the policy for the merit system and review discipline, and then, of course, guarantee that departments are complying with all of the HR rules that are governed by the merit system through its appeals function. The consolidation is really going to facilitate HR modernization, because we have this 30-year-old system in the state of California, and we just can't afford not to continue with our modernization effort. There have been a number of improvements made at SPB and with the merit functions in state HR over the last 4 years since I joined the board. We've reduced our backlog in appeals from 8,000 to the number I got yesterday was 325 cases. We've also automated over 100 examinations. And we collaborated 4 years ago to create what we called the HR Modernization Project. It was really an effort between DPA and SPB to join our bifurcated system. And the HR Mod team was appointed by the leadership at DPA and the leadership at SPB. And they were really the glue that held together the two organizations as we endeavored to improve and modernize the HR system. With this consolidation, all of those bifurcated functions will be going to one place. So this will really facilitate those modernization efforts we've made over the last 4 years. Those were my remarks. If Howard wanted to make some remarks, then we can answer questions.
Thank you, Susie. Good morning. My name's Howard Schwartz. I'm the Chief Deputy Director for the Department of Personnel Administration. I'm here testifying on behalf of the department and its director, Ron Yank. Susie covered much of what I wanted to say. We've been working hand in glove together for the past many months. When the whole concept of a consolidation was first vetted amongst the leaders of the two organizations, Susie and I got together and established a regular lunch schedule where we could get together, talk about how we could educate our own staffs about the plan, garner support amongst stakeholders, and try to resolve whatever ambiguities or questions might come up between our two organizations as to who is in the end supposed to do what. And I'm happy to report that we've established a very, very close relationship working together, the State Personnel Board staff and the DPA staff, in trying to get this consolidation complete. I suspect that that relationship will continue long after and long into the new establishment of the Cal HR, and certainly all the folks at DPA who will become a part of the new Cal HR look forward to having their new colleagues join them in one integrated department, their new colleagues from the State Personnel Board. And so we're here, of course, to answer any of the detailed questions that perhaps Secretary Morgenstern or Mr. Gillihan or Ms. Lee didn't get to. And with that, I think both Susie and I are happy to help sort through whatever questions you might have.
Any questions from the panel? Ms. Ambrose, let me raise the same question I started. I guess you would be the executive officer for the board. You would remain in that position under this plan.
That's correct. My position is actually in the Constitution, Article 7, Section 2.
Okay, so you would remain, so that wouldn't be affected.
Well, my position will remain, yes.
Right. Is it,
reporting to the board.
Reporting to the board.
Appointed by the board.
Appointed by the board. So
correct.
In the new structure that we have, who actually gives someone a pink slip in the state? So let's say that I was working, and I'm just going to pick a department. I was working at corrections, and I was recommended for termination. And who ultimately, does this change who would actually issue the pink slip and say, you got to go? You ain't got to go home, but you got to get out of here. Who would actually issue the termination notice and sign it in the current structure, both in the current and the proposed?
That would be Howard in both cases.
Yeah. For the staff that would remain under the direction of the State Personnel Board, they would come to the new Cal HR department or Administrative Services Department division, and they would ask for our administrative help in putting together the paperwork. Mm-hmm. It would ultimately be for that portion of the staff that remains under the SPB's control, the SPB's decision and Susie's decision as to whether to take action. We would help support that if they decided to do that by helping draft the paperwork and serve the paperwork and get it, all the mechanics of it taken care of.
So what we do now, maybe, let me make sure I understand. The current process for a pink slip would be what?
To draft a what's known as an adverse action.
Take me all the way back. Okay, so let's switch it from corrections. Let's go to DMV.
Right.
Okay, so there's a person working at the DMV office in Inglewood.
Right.
Okay, and he or she has an issue at the job site.
Right.
Okay, the person in charge of them, supervisory or whatever, raises a concern. What happens after that?
Okay. Well, in the disciplinary context, there may be two ways people leave: discipline or layoff. But let's stay.
Right. Let's discipline.
Stay with discipline.
Okay.
Okay. So the matter would be dealt with on a relatively informal basis at the work site. Supervisors would get together with a troubled employee and try to cancel that employee or work with the employee and solve the problem. Let's assume, for the purposes of this discussion, that that was unsuccessful. A decision would be made at the local work site to put together a more formal action known as an adverse action. The term of art would be used. That is essentially a notice that the employee is subject to discipline, and it would assess whatever that disciplinary action would be. It could be a demotion.
We're still at the job site now.
Yeah, still at the job site.
Okay.
Right. So the adverse action would be served on the employee. The employee has a certain period of time, 30 days, 30 days to appeal that, and if appealed, then the matter would be reviewed by the State Personnel Board, and ultimately the employee would have due process rights to contest the adverse action there.
Okay, so I'm just trying to go through the Rubik's Cube. Okay, so the employee contests because the recommendation at the job site was that they got to go. Okay, so that's the recommendation. That recommendation is contested. It goes to the State Personnel Board, where what takes place?
So hearing is set before an administrative law judge. The case is heard, the evidence is presented, and then the proposed decision is sent to the State Personnel Board, the 5-member board, and they decide whether to adopt, modify, or reject the decision.
Okay. For this discussion, they decide to adopt that decision, so that the ALJ says you got to go, and the board adopts that finding. Then what happens?
Then, well, if it's a dismissal, the employee has already been dismissed. So the purpose of the appeal is to determine whether or not that employee stays dismissed or comes back to work.
Okay. I'm sorry. You can tell I do this every day. The dismissal took place when?
When the employee was served with the adverse action by the department. So they have a 5-day period after the adverse action is served to do what we call a Skelly hearing. And if during the Skelly hearing the decision is sustained, then the employee is let go at that point.
Okay, let me
And
go,
then it
let
gets
me go back.
appealed.
See, you put a new thing in. Okay, so I've never met Mr. Skelly. I'm sure that
he's right there.
Is it? Okay, so issue takes place at the work site. The work site supervisors come together and say, and if everybody knows this, I'm sorry, because.
No, this is very good.
Okay, all right. I'm just. Okay, so.
Don't tell can they fire him?
That's right. Okay, so the work site supervisors come together and recommend that this employee be terminated. That's their recommendation. Okay, when that recommendation goes to, as you described it, the personnel administration, provided the employee does or does not contest it within 30 days.
No, I'm sorry. When you asked about the pink slip, I interpreted that to mean layoff. That's handled by Department of Personnel Administration. So with adverse actions, the department makes the decision whether to take adverse action. Let's say it's a dismissal of an employee. That action is written up in a document. The employee is apprised of all of the reasons for the dismissal, and then the employee is served with that document. The employee has the right at that point to request what is called a Skelly hearing, and the department basically appoints someone, a neutral person, to just review it, do a preliminary review, and decide whether or not to sustain the dismissal.
Okay, so the Skelly hearing officer is not an ALJ.
No, not typically.
Okay, so the employee, the employee contests that process. So that you still have the Skelly hearing, the employee contests. So after the Skelly hearing, then what happens?
Then the employee can appeal the action to the State Personnel Board. So if the Skelly officer does not overturn the dismissal, then the employee has the right to file their appeal with the State Personnel Board.
But after the Skelly hearing, they're terminated.
Correct.
Okay, so you're out the door, and now every appeal that you make subsequent to that is an appeal to get your job back.
Yes.
But you're effectively terminated after the Skelly hearing.
Yes.
Okay. Did everybody else know that, or did? Okay, so you do this committee. So I could tell you about wine and gambling, but I don't. Okay, all right. Okay, so the Personnel Board does not have to necessarily hear it either. They could look at the Skelly hearing and determine that they think that everything was above board. And
No.
They do have to hear it?
Yes. We don't consider the Skelly hearing. We only look to see whether or not the employee was afforded their Skelly rights.
Okay, so the employee is terminated, and the process with the ALJ would take place at the State Personnel Board.
Yes.
But the employee is terminated at that point.
Yes. And terminated throughout our process.
Would they have a right to counsel? I mean, for example, let's say that this employee was a member of a bargaining unit. Would the unit be able to represent them? Does their representation suspend? Would they have to secure their own counsel? Or
They can be represented by their union. They can be represented by anyone they choose, their dad, anyone.
So
friend.
what would happen when the Personnel Board reviews all the facts and finds, in fact, that the employee, that something happened there, and they deem it that the employee should be rehired?
Should be rehired? Then we order the employee back to work, and we order back pay.
Because they could come up with a different conclusion than these people over here had.
Then the Skelly
Yes.
officer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the board has independent constitutional authority. They are the final say on all discipline in state government.
And after reviewing all the facts, they could in fact say we felt the employee was terminated wrongly, and we
Yes.
therefore deem it that they come back.
Yes.
Okay.
Or the board could modify the penalty.
Okay.
so let me see. So I've got the work site, and then Skelly,
Correct.
and then you're terminated post Skelly. You appeal to the board, where you'd have an ALJ hearing. If the ALJ hearing takes place, and that's assured, so there's no option for that. So if the employee appeals, they're guaranteed a ALJ hearing.
Yes.
And then it goes to the board, or is it depending on what the ALJ recommends?
No, they all go to the
They
board.
all go, so then it goes to the board, and if the board sustains that, then the person remains terminated as they were following the Skelly process.
Correct.
And so if they want to pursue something after that, they can go to court.
Yes. A writ can be filed in Superior Court to challenge the board's decision.
Okay, does this change under the proposal?
No.
So
these same processes would still remain the same way?
It all remains the same.
Because you're going to be an independent on your own. So
Correct.
You are still there.
Yes.
Okay, so the efficiency that we're going to gain would occur through what?
The HR personnel processes. So, for instance, the board currently assembles and validates state examinations. We do psychological screenings for peace officer. We do medical screenings for peace officers. We administer the state civil rights program. All of those functions will be transferring over to CalHR. So the board no longer will be assembling state exams. Okay, CalHR will, or the departments primarily do that now themselves. The board does some of the service-wide class exams, like office technician, staff services analyst, staff services manager exams, and all of that will now be done over at CalHR, or the departments will continue to do their own department-specific exams.
Okay. I've kind of hogged the time. Any other questions from the panel? If you're shifting those functions back for the exams and the other things, will you still require as many people? I'm going to go now to, I think, what was Senator Gaines's question. Might there be a savings in personnel? I understand from Mr. Morgenstern that it couldn't be scored because you didn't know how many, but there might be some attrition reductions in the combination of the two departments.
Right. Well, what the proposal calls for is a PY savings in consolidating the administrative services functions, so we won't need to have two fiscal offices or two IT shops or two business services offices. So there are some PY savings there with that consolidation, and then also flattening out the organization. So instead of each of us having our own leadership organization, consolidating the two will require fewer people at that level.
But we can't quantify that because, go ahead,
Richard Gillihan, Department of Finance. Actually, our estimates assume about a 60 PY reduction over 2012, 13, and 13, 14.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions of this panel? Thank you. I'm glad you stayed. I knew we would need you again. Any questions of this panel? That you know what I'm going to do, Mr. Drown? Is that it? Do people ever confuse you about that name?
All the time.
I've never met anybody named Drown. No, I'm sure they think I'm making this up, but that.
There were some Los Angeles Drowns.
Did they live?
Good morning. I'm Stuart Drown. I'm the Executive Director of the Little Hoover Commission. The Commission, by statute, hears governor's reorganization plans. It's the first stop, and the reorganization statute calls on the Commission to make a recommendation to hear it, gather testimony, and make a recommendation to the legislature to either accept it or to reject it, let it go forward. The Commission held its hearing June 2nd. It voted and made its recommendation June 23rd and asked the legislature to allow this reorganization to go forward. We heard from the SPB, we heard from the administration, we heard from union representatives, and we heard from personnel managers in large state departments. In addition, we built on the work that the Commission's done over the past 30 or so years that has recommended pulling these two organizations together. And we see the savings that the Finance Department has scored, but more important, we see the opportunity for immediate efficiencies on behalf of the personnel departments of our large state agencies, simply by having greater clarity, having all the daily operations of personnel under one department, where people are talking together, and under the authority of a single department leader. This retains the independent autonomy of the State Personnel Board. It does. The Commission previously had recommended and merging everything together. This reorganization does not do that. It's the Commission feels it's a very important start to clarifying these day-to-day HR roles, and then more important, for setting a foundation for helping build the state workforce that we're going to need for this future government. We're right now in a reactionary mode where we're dealing with these budget cuts, and that is a top priority, but we also have to acknowledge that with these layoffs that we have and with the retirements of experienced state workers and state managers, we're going to have to plan to rebuild our state workforce in a manner that is appropriate to the kind of state government we're going to have in the future. And it's important to have all these pieces together to be able to do that.
And I know that the Little Hoover Commission had recommended this before, so.
Yes.
And do you find that streamlining would not make less? It actually just makes it better? Is that
It
what
should, as described to us, it should make it better. Just by having, right now there is a page on DPA's website of who does what, okay? And so that's a reflection of the lack of clarity that state HR people have to deal with when they're trying to figure out, well, what do we do in this situation? Well, we have to go to the DPA website to figure out whether we go to DPA for that or SPB to that. So that's an indication of the uncertainty that personnel managers have to deal with every day, and their employees and people who want to get a job with the state. So you've got that uncertainty on a daily basis. The fact that when you print it out, it's 9 pages long. There's 9 pages of who does what. And to us, that's a signal that change is way overdue.
Well, I think right now the mode on the outside is that all state governments should be gotten rid of, without realizing that in order for state government to actually work, you actually need real people to actually work in departments to do the services that the public demands and expects.
Correct. And with this Cal HR, you'll have the training, you'll have personnel development, you'll have evaluation, you'll be able to do those things all in one place and develop the state workforce for the needs of today as well as for the needs of the future. You'll have it all in one place. That's why the Commission recommended that to go forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions from any of the members? Mr. Gates.
Do you anticipate other aspects of state government being presented by the governor for recommendation from the Little Hoover Commission in terms of how to proceed? I mean, is this the first step of many in terms of reconfiguration of government services?
We've had discussions with the governor's office on that. They are very busy with plans to change things going forward. It's not clear how much of that will come through the commission in the form of a reorganization or how much will be done as it was in the governor's budget plan. I mean, the governor's budget plan has significant reorganizations in terms of realignment with implications for the Department of Public Health and alcohol and drug programs and criminal justice. So that was massive change that was done through the budget process. But we've asked and we've told him that we're ready when these plans come, should he decide to make it go that way. On this one, we've been told that this is the first step, and the recommendations the Commission's made in the past are a lot more ambitious and a lot more aggressive than this, but we feel this is a very important first step, and it needs to be made now. I think the people that we've talked to at DPA understand that there's a lot more that has to be done, and I think that's reflected in the fact that they've taken HR Mod and taken it from a small project that's kind of a side project that has been successful on its own terms and is going to make that part of the mission of the new Cal HR. I mean, that should be the mission of the new Cal HR, is to modernize the state HR process.
Great, thank you. I just from my standpoint, I appreciate it because there's a level of independence through the Little Hoover Commission that, in my mind, adds credibility to any sort of proposal that comes before you for review.
Thank you.
And so I would encourage that in the future. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Okay, hearing none, we are going to move to public comment.
Thank you, sir.
We had
Thank you, sir.
Alfonso Ramirez had indicated that he wanted to come forward. Are there any other members of the public? I'll get this vote done. Get that.
Yeah, so I just curious. Good morning.
Push the button.
The red button.
Are you guys all together, or?
No.
Okay, all right.
He is. Good morning. My name's Alfonso Ramirez. I'm a retired state employee. I worked for the state of California for over 28 years. While I worked for the state, I worked at several departments, including the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the State Personnel Board, and the Department of Personnel Administration, among others. I was also a personnel officer during my work with the state. I'm a member and a representative of LULAC, the League of Latin American Citizens, Lorenzo Patino, Council number 2862, Sacramento, California. LULAC is here today advancing our goal that state government be represented of the state of California. LULAC has submitted to the committee a letter for the record that addresses several concerns of LULAC relating to the reorganization plan. LULAC has a number of concerns that are described in our letter. The highlight of that concerns are as follows: that timely and transparent data on recruitment and hiring of state employees be provided, that adequate resources are provided for auditing and oversight, that the roles and functions of the Office of Civil Rights are not diluted, that the impact of civil rights is adequate resources to address adverse impact in state testing, that the state classification process, administration, and approval be consolidated and placed under the State Personnel Board. Lastly, we believe that it's important that the Office of Civil Rights report directly to the Director of Cal HR so that our government appropriately represents the people of the state of California. What I want to say is that, when I started working at the Department of the State Personnel Board in the early 80s, it was a time that the State Personnel Board had adequate resources, and it had a very extensive and productive audit and oversight program. When the classification program was redirected to DPA, I went and worked over there. I was in the classification and pay division. Over the time in the 80s and 90s, that division lost many resources, and when I left the agency in the early 2000s, it was only a shell of what it had been before. I mean, it's good to talk about, that this new organization is going to streamline and create efficiencies, but for the organization to really be effective, it has to have the adequate resources to do good auditing and good oversight, and that doesn't exist today within the Department of Personnel Administration and also the State Personnel Board. There's been several reductions in staffing over the last several years, and both agencies have not been able to really address the problems and inconsistencies that exist within state agencies. If this proposal moves forward, if it receives your support, you really need to understand that this organization that's proposed is not going to be effective in representing the needs of the people of California if it's not adequately staffed to do the work. I mean, I've seen it. I saw it when I started at SPB in 1980, when SPB had the adequate resources to audit, the merit system, the examination system, and over, the last 30, 35 years, I saw, those audit and oversight responsibilities end. So that's, basically what I want to say. Just quickly, I want to also add that LULAC is willing to work with the leaders of the organization to, make some recommendations to make this new department successful.
All right, we have your letter on file, and
Okay.
so we'll make sure they get that. Yes, sir.
Robin Corlejo, I'm a LULAC member here in support.
Okay. Well, in support of his position.
Well, LULAC is neutral on the position. I'm here in support of Al's comments.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Margarita Maldonado with SCIU 1000. And as you know, SCIU 1000 is supportive of creating efficiencies and also accountability in government. And we look forward to working with the administration and execution and implementation of this plan. And there are a few points that we've been very verbal on around the consolidation of the department. The disciplinary matrix, so SCIU 1000, we have some concerns with that matrix. We are concerned that the matrix will reduce the judge's flexibility to take into consideration all the factors that are in the case.
How will it change from what's taking place now?
There is no matrix right now. They're proposing a matrix that will go across all the departments, and the matrix will identify what kind of remedies they would perceive would come out of, I don't want to really say punishments, but
if I understand, I mean, and you do this much more than I do, but that's why I was asking the questions earlier. So today you would have the site would make a recommendation. There'd be a Skelly hearing with a non-judicial person who would be appointed to do that. The employee would have a right to appeal that Skelly process, where it would go to the board, where it would be heard by an ALJ. That process would be mandatory, that an ALJ would hear it. The ALJ's recommendation would then go to the board. The board would hear every one of those recommendations from the ALJ, and any one of the Skelly, the ALJ, or the board could refer the employee back to work with back pay. He'd be terminated at the point of the Skelly hearing, and if he went out with the board, he would have an opportunity to go to court and file a written superior court.
So all of that continues.
Right.
However, at the
Okay.
department level, when they're trying to determine what kind of punishment they want to apply to the employee for whatever action
Can I
they were not
interrupt
taking.
you? I think what's happening now, from what I've been told, is that in different departments, it's this big
Yes.
of what kind of firing takes place or what kind of reprimand takes place from this to this.
Right.
And so what you would like to see is a more fair, that everybody follows kind of the same thing. There are circumstances that will occur from case to case, but that it falls in here rather than in here.
Absolutely.
Is that what I'm understanding?
Absolutely. And we want to ensure that the judges have the flexibility to be able to look at the full case and make the determination what is really the right kind of reprimand.
If I'm in Department A and I do something and I get fired for it, but if he's in Department B and does exactly the same thing and they go, stop it.
Right.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we also don't want the judges to feel like that's the only kind of reprimand that employees should receive. We want them to be able to look at the full case. But you're absolutely correct, because we do understand that that is a problem today, and we concur with there needs to be some kind of remedy. I'm not sure if the disciplinary matrix itself and by itself is the remedy, and we are looking forward to working with the administration to figure out what it does look like. Obviously, the merit principles are extremely important to our members, and we want to make sure that the Cal HR department, it allocates that those merit-based functions do reside in SPB, and we will continue to monitor that and make sure that they don't get eroded, and along with some of the concerns that you have already brought up. The neutrality goes along in the same lines, and you've asked some very good questions, I think, Chairman Wright, about how they would maintain that neutrality. And the other issue that you also brought up, the rights that employees will have when they move over into the Cal HR department, that they will become confidential employees. However, if there are some divisions that don't need to go over there and they can maintain their rights under the Ralph C. Dills Act, we definitely support that piece. And we also want to make sure that the planning incorporates adequate facilities for this new department. As you may or may not know, they're still going to reside in 2 different locations, and that sometimes creates problems for one department to operate efficiently.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hortensia Morales, and I'm here representing the United Latinos, which is a public organization dedicated to ensuring the well-being of Latinos. I want to add also that we also met with LULAC, and we do support their analysis and recommendation, but I'll make my statement brief. While we do support the governor's intent to streamline state government by merging the State Personnel Board and Department of Personnel Administration, we believe that the current proposal does more harm than good. We believe that the speculative savings will be completely drowned out by the added costs to other sectors of state government and by alleviating employee complaints to higher levels. I am here today to ask for you to vote no on the governor's proposed plan. And that's our statement for United Latinos.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Brooks Ellison on behalf of CASE, California attorneys, administrative law judges, and hearing officers in the state employment.
Just 1 second before the witness, you never said if you wanted us to vote no or yes. I mean, you told us a whole bunch.
We're supporting
You're
the
supporting.
reorganization. Obviously, the devil is in the details sometimes, and we want to make sure that we are incorporated in the discussion. And I can tell you so far, we have been invited to multiple discussions, and but there's still some work that has to be done.
Senator Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. I have a question along those same lines. You know, obviously, we are not looking at any sort of amendments for this process for GRP1, and we've heard a lot of concerns about ensuring that there is adequate transparency and oversight. What will be our process as a legislature as the implementation phases move forward? Will there be additional hearings as this moves on? What will be our oversight function on this?
I think we vote on it today, and then it goes on the floor.
Yeah, we would vote today. It would go on the floor. The personnel, Senator Grady McLeod's committee, Public Employment and Retirement, would have more legislative oversight. Because it's a reorg, it's kind of sort of how we got into it as GO, but the monitoring going forward would be with the other committee, unless there was another consolidation of departments that would make it a GO matter. So yes, we would still watch it, but it wouldn't be a joint effort to do so.
But we would, I'm sure we'd have an opportunity to, you would have an opportunity to review it if necessary after looking at the implementation and how it's moving along.
Go say that. All right. I'm going to ask staff who's going back. There's another Ledge Council requirement for conformity. Paul, why don't you identify yourself and take that up?
Paul Donahue from GO Committee staff. There is a requirement in the GRP statutes now that in the following year, Legislative Council prepare it's sort of a cleanup bill, if you will, that is then submitted as a piece of legislation rather than a GRP. So there would be an opportunity at that point, should the legislature so decide, to make some conforming changes to the conforming changes that are submitted by Legislative Council.
So we still have some sort of oversight
So there's
function.
still that it's tantamount to a oversight responsibility. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pam, would you? Pam, did you want to voice that? Okay.
Again, thank you, members. Brooks Ellison on behalf of CASE, California attorneys, administrative law judges, and hearing officers in State Employment Bargaining Unit 2. We are generally supportive and understand the reasons behind the reorganization, and really our concerns, and that's what they are really focused around one particular area. That's the matrix. Not so much that there is a matrix or they're going to develop a matrix, but what do you do with the matrix once you have it, in terms of, and going through with Senator Wright's hypothetical of going through and now you're at the ALJ, you have a matrix and you say consideration and respect. And that creates a certain standard in our mind. And we represent 20 ALJs, and that is an undefined standard. In other words, the first level that you have is admissibility. In other words, you take this matrix and you make it admissible, but then you do something else, you give it some weight. but you don't really define what the weight is, so you go into a different concept. And if you were all ALJs and you were hearing, each one of you were hearing a case, you would get this new plan and it would say consideration and respect, and Senator Berryhill, you'd say, well, okay, I'm going to treat it as admissible. And Senator Wright, you may say, well, that's almost like a rebuttable presumption. I don't really know what it is, but it changes dramatically the outcome of it. And what it should have said, because, so you can see how confusing it is, what it should have said is it's simply admissible. That way you wouldn't interfere with the constitutional prerogative of SPB to determine discipline, and that's one issue, and you wouldn't have it be confusing. And confusing is the problem, is exactly what they're trying to avoid. In other words, have a consistent set of a discipline matrix and have that matrix then so everybody sees it. But if it's going to be interpreted differently, you know, Senator Corbett, if you got it and you said, well, consideration and respect, I have no idea what that means. And it's very troubling for us to introduce that kind of confusion and also tell SBB we think it's unconstitutional, which creates kind of downstream a series of issues. So I think in terms of the appropriate time, that needs to be clarified, that really can't mean any more than admissible. And if you're trying to do something more than admissible, then two things. You have to ask yourself, is it constitutional? And two, what is it you're trying to do? Because you have to tell the 20 judges that we represent and then are going to hear all these cases for all the other units what they're supposed to do with it. I have with me Pat Whalen, who's the general counsel of CASE, to kind of continue and to answer any questions.
Good morning, members. I would just point out that GRP1...
Your name, please?
Pat Whalen, I'm CASE general counsel. GRP1 is obviously a fairly lengthy document. Our concern is in Section 82 of that document. It would modify Section 19582 of the Government Code by adding a new subdivision E that would include this consideration and respect language that Brooks Ellison just talked about. And our ALJs who are charged under the Constitution with enforcing the merit system are concerned as to what does that language mean and how do we carry out our independent constitutional duties, but at the same time are being told by this document to modify the weight we give to a particular piece of evidence.
Hold up a second. Mr. Morgenstern and Ms. Lee, let me ask both of you to come back. This gentleman just referenced a section of the GRP, and I'm not sure that you heard that. If you would let them know, or if he could see what you have, so that we could possibly have your answer to the question that he raised. I don't purport to know that, but that's why you're here.
Well, thank you. I know there was a reason. Yes, we want... This was put together with the simple idea of affecting the actions of the departments, so the departments should try to inject a degree of consistency into the discipline. It does not dictate to the State Personnel Board or its hearing officers. The State Personnel Board will give consideration and respect to this, and then they'll put down decisions, and they'll pretty early on make some precedential decisions that I'm sure, as they do on this or any other issue that comes before them, and their ALJs will take direction from the State Personnel Board, which will lay down precedential decisions that'll cover this as it covers most any other subject. Howard?
I reiterate the exact same comments. You know, first and foremost, this is not intended in any way, in any measure, to interfere with the full judicial discretion that the ALJs or the board at the SPB currently exercise or will exercise in the future. It's intended as a guideline, or a tool. It's not developed yet, but the concept is it will be a guideline and a tool for first-line supervisors or management to figure out what the appropriate penalty is in any given situation of misconduct. If the the adverse action is rendered and the case is appealed to the State Personnel Board, the only statutory proviso would be for judges to give consideration and respect. Essentially, the plain language there, you acknowledge that, in fact, there has been some type of uniform assessment of the conduct and a uniform assessment of a penalty. If they agree with that.
Let me make this as a suggestion, and I think within the 90 days, if we are able to move this forward, it would just seem to me that the two of you ought to get together and, if necessary, clarify the respect language. I mean, if he's the ALJ and he's raising a concern as to the transparency and meaning of the language, it would just seem to me that this doesn't seem to be a big deal that can't be resolved within the 90 days so that the ALJs and the drafters of the GRP can come together and make it clear for everybody what we're attempting to do. And we've got the statutory backup period in order to do that. So I think we should be able to achieve the point that you raised, sir, and the same concerns that you raised. I mean, you're making a change, as I've seen in my years here. And, you know, for lawyers, a comma can, you know, be a watershed event. So rather, we're not going to get to rewrite that today. But if the two of you, and I'm going to assume and hope that this is not the first time y'all met.
No.
So.
But we've raised it.
Okay, so if you guys can, in the next 90 days, and it'll be a part of what Ledge Council does, if it needs to be clarified or if you're comfortable, then we can resolve that at that point. We won't get to do it today, but that'll let us have an opportunity to clear, you know, that confusion up as it currently sits.
Certainly.
I made one comment. It is, as you say, it could be minor, it could not. But to not change it could fundamentally change discipline in the new reorganization in a way that I think none of the participants would agree to. So while we are conceptually supportive of what they want to do, this change either takes that matrix and begins to introduce it as a mandatory charging document down that line, right, or it's simply admissible. And that is a huge
I'm laughing. When you say Matrix, I'm thinking of Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne. I'm like, but
yeah, it will be that. It will be that confusing.
Okay, all right. I'm just saying. So that, but again, so if as we move forward, if you guys can resolve, you know, that to the point of clarity for everyone, I think we've got time to do that. And you're comfortable with us moving forward, and there's time for you to resolve the issue relative to respect and the other things in that ALJ process. Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak before this committee? Mr. Morgenstern, I was just wondering, some of the other concerns that some of the other people, and again, they were talking about the matrix, with not Keanu Reeves. But,
I can't quite.
Okay. The matrix they're talking about. And I don't know, maybe the word matrix is the wrong thing. It's maybe guidelines that they use and that they fall within a certain parameter.
I think guidelines is just a good word. In fact, it's a better word. We should have put in guidelines instead of matrix. But a matrix happens to exist, so that's why our attorney put in matrix. But I think guidelines is exactly correct. I'll repeat again that these are guidelines that generally are aimed at having consistency within departments. We wanted to make sure that it was admissible, as the gentleman points out, and recognizable. You're not going to give the same penalty. You know, two people can do the same thing. One's a probationer, the other's been 30 years on the job and has never had a problem. There's not going to be the same result in those cases. Everybody recognizes it. We recognize it. We don't believe that there's any major change at all, because ultimately The final decisions are made by a constitutional board with 10-year terms of office and a high integrity, especially the current one. So we understand anytime there's change, people are concerned and worry about it. But this is not, the idea for this program was to put more efficiency in government, to do our job more effectively, so that the various departments of the State Personnel Board of the State of California, the employees of the State of California, and the citizens will all come out better, I believe.
Thank you. Is there anybody else out there? This is your chance to speak, because we are going to vote on this today. So, okay.
Senator Corbett?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, is it appropriate to entertain a motion?
We'll take one for GO.
Okay.
We've got a GO motion on the floor.
Okay, we need a motion from someone from Purse.
You want to go first?
Okay, so I see I'm missing. I'm missing Walters and Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla.
He's on both committees too.
He's on both committees. Okay, call for the vote. Okay.
Negrete McLeod.
Aye.
Negrete McLeod, aye. Walters. Gaines. Aye. Gaines, aye. Padilla. Vargas. Aye. Vargas, aye.
We have enough votes here for us.
Okay. Well, you'll go on call the roll for GO.
Motion is that the plan be allowed to take effect. Wright?
Aye.
Wright, aye. Anderson? Aye. Anderson, aye. Berryhill? Aye. Berryhill, aye. Calderon? Canella? Aye. Canella, aye. Corbett? Aye. Corbett, aye. De Leon? Evans? Aye. Evans, aye. Hernandez? Aye. Hernandez, aye. Padilla? Aye. Padilla, aye. Strickland? Wyland? Yee.
Okay. If we could call the roll again.
Thank you.
Walters. Padilla. Aye. Padilla, aye.
Okay. That bill is out on
our side. We'll be out. We're going to hold our roll open for another 5 minutes. We'll shut it down at 11 o'clock. Again, if you're a member of GO and you want to vote on the GRP, we'll be here until 11 o'clock, and the roll will be open, and we'll shut it down.
PERS will do the same. We will be here till 11. We have one missing member. Okay. Okay, so we will be here. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for voicing your concerns and your opinions.
Very well done.
Hey, Senator, do you want to lift it for Senator Wyland?
Open the roll on GRP 1.
Going to open the roll for the GO vote. Wyland. Wyland, aye. Replace the call. I believe we know that Strickland's coming back. Sure. Senator Wright? No, we're going to lift it for you right now. Senator Wright, we have Senator Strickland.
Open the roll again.
Thank you, Rod.
Opening the roll on GRP 1, absent members Calderon, De Leon, Strickland.
Aye.
Strickland, aye. Yee. 10-0. 10-0.
Thank you. Thank you.
They're still on call. I don't know about De Leon, but Calderon and Yee are here, so.
Brenda. Okay. Yeah. Oh. Senator. We have Senator De Leon.
Said 11. I would pretend. We're going to open the roll on GRP 1 for GO.
Absent members Calderon, De Leon,
De Leon, no.
De Leon, aye.
Yeah.
Yee. 11-0.
We have enough, right? Yes. Let me make a call.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to close the roll.
The action is that GRP won't be permitted to take effect.
Okay. The PERS committee recommendation is that the GR1 be permitted to take effect. My understanding is that Ms. Walters is gone, so I am closing the roll. Okay. 4-0. Okay.
Did any of them live?